I'm Bill Shaw, and I sort of remember who I am, but I did want to make some remarks about myself. I manage Milwaukee County's Land Information Office, and am a WiGICC council member for the city, town, and village member slot that's on the council. And essentially, this meeting is trying to get the band back together again. The WiGICC Work Group, Elevation Work Group, has kind of been on hiatus for a couple of years now. The last formal meeting that I have recollection of, or I have documentation of, was in September of 2011. The first meeting was in April of 2011 as well, so there was a lot of activity in 2011, and then it's fallen off quite a bit since then. So we're trying to get the band back together again. I'd like to see a raise of hands for people who actually participated in those earlier meetings. I see some people in the audience that I know. Red perhaps was there, and Brad Duncan was there. The panel members that I have here to answer some of the questions that we're going to try to use to stimulate the discussion include Jeremy Freund, Stormwater GIS Specialist for Veregin County Land Conservation Department, and assistance with organization of the Wisconsin LiDAR Data User Group. If we have time at the end of this session, Jeremy will discuss some of that and bring you, give you some awareness of the website. And my intention is to post, along with Jeremy's website, the results of this, discussion here, and try to continue on the discussion beyond that. We have Howard Veregin. Howard was appointed state cartographer in 2009. He directs the activities of the state cartographer's office at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Previously, Howard was director of geographic information services at Rankin County. He's a geography professor at the University of Minnesota. We also have Pena. I'll go with that. Kemp has worked with the USDA, NRCS in Wisconsin for 22 years. He currently holds a position at U.S. National Sergio coordinator, whatever that is. Maybe Kemp. Soils. Okay. Kemp was has in-depth knowledge of digital orthophotography, data development, data elevation models, spatial analysis, and cartographic design. We have Ron Wenzel, USGS geospatial liaison from Minnesota and Wisconsin, works with federal, state, local government agencies to promote cooperative efforts that support the USGS National Geospatial Program. Ron has been a cartographer, geographer in the federal government for 30 years in various positions. And then we have Colleen Hermans. Maybe bad emphasis on Hermans, but works at the Wisconsin DNR as GIS project lead in dams and floodplain program. The program coordinates with Pena to make local floodplain maps throughout the state. The program uses LiDAR for engineering and mapping of floodplains. I'm going to ask the panel members to discuss, I guess, or provide some opening remarks with regard to their organization, their commitment or involvement with LiDAR in their organizations, and perhaps give a little maybe philosophical background in terms of how they perceive opportunities for LiDAR to improve in Wisconsin. First off, though, would be me, and the city or county. I used to work for the city more, but the county acquired LiDAR in 2010. We have currently we purchased that along with a grant for the flood grants that were provided from HUD. We elected to get 0.7 meter NPS, which in the urban environment is a tremendous boon. And we also acquired along with that is what I understood to be contractual requirements in that grant was that you would also get a Pena accuracy report, which kind of dictated to us, the type of deliveries that we were going to get. We received 1 foot contours, or we had developed as part of the grant process 1 foot contours, EM, DSM, intensity, and a bunch of other, I guess, add-on derivatives. We at county in Morgan County, we don't see a lot of requests for basic LiDAR data, class, or terrain. Basically, people in Milwaukee are using the 1 foot contours and very satisfied with it. We don't see, but we have provided for requests for that type of data, and we don't see a lot of results or the follow-on products from that. But nonetheless, it doesn't seem to be all that popular to have the data at that level for purposes that are used for engineering purposes in Milwaukee. Most request contour, as I said, and our major use of it is to derive change detection for planimetric feature mapping. So that's how the county essentially uses that. So now I would offer that we could start with perhaps Colleen, and she could perhaps give you a little update on what she's done.
Hello everyone, my name is Colleen, I'm with the DNR. Let's see, our program, like Bill had stated, uses LiDAR data. We usually get it directly from the vendor. A lot of times it seems like it's been years, and that's been convenient because they're in town, and we just exchange hard drives to get the LAS point files. What we use are bare earth point files, so that is, we don't keep the entire point cloud. It's way too much data as it is. We have 30 external hard drives that we have in a cabinet, hoping it doesn't flood or catch on fire again, not again with the fire. And so that has been, transfer of data is a discussion I think that would be nice to have, how to store it. I don't get a lot of requests. I hardly get any requests from people outside of the agency at this point. The counties have their data as well, but I do get a lot of interagency with the DNR requests. And what I have them do is, if it isn't a CDGB county where it's taxpayer funded and it's free for anyone to use, I have them go to the county and get permission first, and then I can share it instead of having the county ship hard drives all over the place. So another topic that I think would be nice to put out there is permission and how to make, if there's a county that is always willing to share, make that available, make that known, or what the processes should be. But storing this data right now is just, tens of gigabytes, if not terabytes at this point, for the counties on this map that we have in-house.
Question to the audience is, how many of your organizations actually offer LiDAR data in some service online for
On those lines of the derivative products, from the bare point shape files, or LES files, we create terrain and then DEMs. That's what help 5-foot DEMs for our mapping standards.
All right, Howard.
Thanks, Bill. Hello. So I've been working with this group since its beginnings back in, 2011, I think. Amanda Schwigler, originally kind of kicked it off. The goals of the original WiGICC group there were 4 or 5 of them, as I recall. One of them was inventorying and mapping the current status of LiDAR data in the state, and we've moved forward on that. On the WiGICC website, there are a variety of different maps available that show you LiDAR data that's available online, as well as LiDAR data that is kind of out there. And Colleen has provided a most recent update to that. It's only a couple of days old, so if you're interested in seeing what the status of that is, you can see that on the WiGICC site.
That's that's currently in the handout.
And that's also in the hand. Very good. A second topic that the Elevation Group worked on or a second kind of priority was data availability. So, access to data online. We now have about 20 counties where we have the DEMs derived from LiDAR available online. And that project was really kicked off by J.C. Nelson of the USGS, who couldn't be here today. But we worked closely with the floodplain program at the DNR to do that, and also with Wisconsin View, and those files are in fact available in Wisconsin View. Some of the other objectives of the working group included things like education, also support related to things like standard REP language, standards and funding and things like that. So we haven't progressed quite as far on some of those initiatives. As Bill indicated, the group's kind of been in a bit of a hiatus for a few years. So we're part of the way there. We're at a bit of a disadvantage because like some of our neighboring states like Minnesota, we don't have a statewide LiDAR program in the state. So it's kind of pieced together based on what most of the counties are doing. As far as a philosophy, Bill, you asked for a philosophy.
Sure, give us a philosophy.
I guess, from my perspective, I'm certainly not an expert in LiDAR. I'm sort of a casual user of elevation data, I guess I would say. My viewpoint is kind of practical, and my philosophy is kind of practical, and I, first and foremost, like to see us get as much data out there in the hands of users as possible in as many formats as people need. Part of that is simply a question of data licensing or sharing and permissions, because there's about 20 counties that are out there, which are the grant-funded counties from 2009, 2010, but there's probably equally as many counties where the data that we'd like to get out there, and I think we should try to focus some effort on doing whatever it takes to get permissions from the counties to do that. We have had requests for LIS data for the point cloud data. I'd like to see us maybe consider ways to make that data accessible. It'd be nice to see some better tie-ins or to continue working on tie-ins with USGS initiatives, like the NED and 3DEP program that Ron's going to talk about. And so I'd like to see the working group kind of amp up a little bit and move on to some of those other initiatives. That's all I have.
Thanks, Howard. Ron?
Ron works for USGS, and I've been working with digital elevation data since the early 1980s. I've been with the survey for 28 years, something like that. I was contouring 7.5-minute maps. We made DEMs. You remember the old 30-meter DEMs and 10-meter DEMs, so I've been involved with elevation data for a long time. Hopefully you got a copy of the handout that's titled USGS Elevation 3DEP. I'd like to see this group continue the effort of at least sharing information about what's available. No doubt some of you had received emails from me in the past querying information about your holdings for LiDAR data, derivative data, not so much data access, but metadata information about it to support the U.S. Interagency Elevation Inventory. It's really what the federal government is looking at for the availability of LiDAR data nationwide. Again, we want good descriptive information about the accuracy and content of it, because we feed that also into our internal program for the National Elevation Data Set. NED is what's housed the DEMs historically. It's still our primary program out of it. Everything we have for funding right now for elevation data is derived from the National MAP program. And one of our greater products, if you, I can tell from the crowd, you weren't all at my presentation at the annual conference, so. But I did talk about National MAP products supporting right now U.S. Townhall. We generate the contracts from that, so that's part of our driving force behind that. Given the opportunity, I've got some slides that will highlight some of the 3D elevation program, 3DEP, also on that fact sheet. And Jim Lacey did an article about the 3DEP fact sheets a couple weeks ago, has some links on it about that. And that's the direction we're going for elevation data from not only the USGS but the federal perspective, involving a national program looking at new specifications for elevation data. Jim?
I'm Jeremy from Outagamie County. I work in the Land Conservation Department, like Bill mentioned. We've had LiDAR since 2005, and our department is probably utilized daily. The bare earth information anyways is utilized daily. We did utilize our point cloud information to extract building footprints a few years ago with the planning department. Currently our data is on, we created a web app using Esri software to disseminate the data that was delivered to us from our vendor. It's all point data, both point cloud and bare earth. The only derivatives we made were different file extensions for the data to make it more user-friendly, but we are uncomfortable putting out DEMs and other things that our vendor did not deliver because there's a host of assumptions that go into generating a DEM, and we just aren't serving that up yet. Bill mentioned the Wisconsin LiDAR Data User Group. That was started back in probably 2007, 2008 with an interest in the conservation field to utilize LiDAR for creating slope maps, predicting erosion, delineating watersheds, projects like that. We had a great consortium with like Kent, with NRCS and some of his staff that are on the programming level, and then we also had other counties and USGS and JC, who's not here. And we put together a pretty good group of people to come up with some standards for doing the conservation engineering white paper, if you will, on when to use the data, when not to use the data. And since then, that group is, the culmination or the end of that group was to create a website, and if we have time, we'll show it later on, to try to disseminate some information, but that was all done based on volunteer time, and currently I just post whatever's interesting coming from Ron or JC or others in the group. My wishes for LiDAR data would be statewide LiDAR acquisition, of course, so hopefully some recognition from the state to fund it for counties that can't afford it, or additional grants. And also for the state to be a clearinghouse for the data, so the data can be given out from a central location with standards, so maybe we can create some DEMs and put them up on the state level with standards to follow. And then the current use, we're starting to see a lot of requests for derived surfaces because we have a new walk with the water quality part of DNR. There's the total maximum daily load for the Fox River in our area. There's also one for the Rock River, and they're developing the Wisconsin River. So pretty soon it'll be statewide. But all these different groups are now looking to get surface models to start doing their own erosion modeling, predicting wetland enhancement areas, all these different requests that we're getting. So we're not quite sure how to handle them yet.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to go last. Mine can be pretty short. NRCS is actually a pretty broad spectrum of a LiDAR user. We use it primarily for conservation planning, erosion, identification, wetland delineation. We do a lot of engineering-related things with LiDAR. So pretty broad spectrum. So like Jeremy said, one of the things that with our staff that we really tried to educate them about was when can you use LiDAR, when can you use the 10-meter DEM, some of those issues, because of the fact that we don't have statewide LiDAR data. So that's a pretty big deal for us, just from the standpoint that we're statewide. actually did a fair amount of processing because we would acquire everything you had. And part of that was just because at the beginning, a lot of counties couldn't tell us what had been done to the data, some of those things. So we decided, well, we'll bite the bullet, we'll do all our own processing, which we don't do as much anymore because what's coming from the vendors is better. So that's a really good thing. But through that process, we learned a great deal. Every time we thought we knew a lot about LiDAR, we realized we didn't know shit. Put it bluntly. But I think that's gotten better. And again, it's all these things that like, do you fill it? Do you not fill it? Because another thing that I didn't mention is we do a lot of hydrological modeling, so that whole filling the sinks and all that is sort of a controversial issue in terms of whether you do it, and if you do it, how do you do it? So that kind of relates to some of the things Jeremy said about like, do you release some of these DEM products where you kind of stomp down the data? So those are some issues. Going back to what Colleen mentioned is that one of the things we really struggle with is that whole data distribution and access. These data sets are brutal. They're big. So that I think is really something that is evolving, is how you handle it. We kind of do a combination of, it's on some of our field office servers, it's on hard drives, I've got a 30 terabyte storage involved, all those types of things. So that is really something that needs to be worked on and addressed. Trying to think of some of the other things. That's a biggie. We've developed some, what we think are some pretty nice LiDAR tools. We started with what we fondly call the Minnesota LiDAR tools, and now they've kind of evolved into the Minnesota-Wisconsin hybrid. Those are public domain, they're available. We've done, I think, a couple of presentations at WLIA, so anybody's interested in those. Those are freely available. They kind of just streamline doing flow direction, flow accumulation, doing sort of what we call micro watersheds, pond storage. There's a variety of sort of hydrology stuff with those. But I think other than that, the other thing from a philosophical standpoint, I'll close with this, is that I think that LiDAR, where we are with LiDAR and elevation data, just so strongly parallels what we went through in the late 80s and early 90s with imagery. It's really a lot the same. It's raster data. It comes with a lot of other baggage, but think of back in the day when we started getting imagery. We struggled with storage. We struggled with distribution. Where would we be without it if Mr. Sid hadn't come along? If we didn't have web services to stream that data? A lot of the same issues with LiDAR data, with elevation data. It's really a lot the same. So I would keep that in mind. And one of the things I mentioned earlier today during one of the presentations is that keep in mind that when you're talking about applying imagery, elevation acquisition goes hand in hand. In my opinion, you can't separate those. So on that, I'll close.
Thanks. I think along those lines, I'd just like to bring up earlier today, Jim Lacey was talking about a hybrid kind of approach to work photography for acquisition work photography. And I guess I feel that along with Canada and along with others, I think that imagery should be, more or less consolidated in our thinking. So if we are going to be considering work photography, we need to be also considering lunar imagery and LiDAR as that effort moves forward, because they all move forward together. So that's some of the kinds of remarks. So anyway, I've kind of subdivided a series of questions into data development, organization, training. Some of the things that questions, or maybe most of them. But I guess I'd like to pose an organizational question, and you'll have to bear with me my classifications, you might not follow everybody's thoughts. But how would you recommend, and this is to all of the panel members, and then the audience as well, is how would you recommend state and local, we acquire state and local buy-in for LiDAR, such as it's happening in Minnesota and Iowa? What could, and I guess a follow-on question is, what could WiGICC do to assist in development by that's a possibility? Anybody on the panel want to address that? Perhaps others in the audience want to discuss that opportunity.
Jumping in, Howard?
Not really, Bill, can you explain what you mean by buy-in?
Kent's and others on the panel have said that we needed a kind of a state, maybe centralized repository, and perhaps as Jim was mentioning as part of the North Photography, setting standards, setting the opportunity for purchasing the data itself. But how the organic growth, this is a frustration to me, but in Whatcom County it's not really necessarily a problem in the county, but I've worked in other capacities. I've worked in DNR, I've worked in private sector, or in the utility area, and the organic growth of data just doesn't seem reasonable. So, to acquire buy-in needs to have some sort of state direction and methods for gathering and consuming, or making it consumable, making products available in standardized formats. So I guess that's where I was.
Tough question to answer, right? I think you can see from some of the maps that are being displayed on the board up here that the growth in the state is really organic. I think that, I can't speak for all counties, but I think that many counties who haven't yet acquired LiDAR do have plans to do so. I think there's kind of a broad recognition of the value of LiDAR. I think the distribution side can be handled if the data is there, and the rights to share that data with others are there. I think we can handle that, because that's really just a technology problem. But it seems to me, and based on my conversations with those folks I have had discussions with, is the main factor is the cost. I know that LiDAR cost has come down a lot, but it's still probably 250 per square mile, something like that. So that's order of magnitude more than photography, or at least close to that. So if you're looking at $200,000 or something to do a county, where does that come from? So maybe with WLIP, the Act 20, there is certainly the possibility of making LiDAR more of a strategic priority for the state, and using some of that WLIP funding to do something maybe similar to what Jim was suggesting for aerial photography. Divide the state up, identify funding opportunities, and lead a statewide program. Aside from that, maybe Ron might have some comments related to freedom, and I understand that's going to be in place next year, so what have you thought about that?
I've always got comments. A lot of what you've heard, and I'll echo some of Ken's comments here, is that the technology problems that exist with imagery in the past has been almost resolved. We're going to see the same thing, I think, in elevation data. And there are several analogies, and that's been brought up before. I like some of the stuff Jim talked about this morning. I think a lot of the things of implementing standards and characteristics you know, the model is the business plan, which is going to be a requirement, or at least an expectation. In 3-depth is the state to have something in place, spelling out what they want to do, what they want to collect for elevation data, ideally how they want to fund it. I know that's the topic of this, but I think, you know, following suit and having that incorporated is a good starting point for it. I think the same way we've seen, think back, those of you that have been around, again, the analogy with orthoimagery, the feds led orthoimagery years ago and said this is the way it's going to be. They established specifications and standards. They went about doing it. Over time, they incorporated partnership with the states. And I think if you look at FSA's work now with native imagery, they're incorporating buy-ups from the states. And I look at WROC and saying, here's a case where the state is leading it. So my recommendation would be building on the business plan right now for imagery, trying to branch that out into elevation data and having some guidance documents to go along with it. I will say that unfortunately FGDC funding for cooperative agreements project that help pay for the business plan development for orthoimagery is not the cards right now. So there are some issues at bay, I think, for our fiscal 14 and fiscal 15. But I think we've got time to put some of those things in place.
Well, again, I think just answering the cost question and the technology is coming around, and there's some opportunities for the parallelism between LiDAR and orthophotography. I just don't see, I guess, that standards can be, I guess, you know, really brought forward such that there's not some central responsibility for that. I guess that's my viewpoint in guiding, you know, that, and that comes through whether it's a work group like the WiGICC Elevation Committee or it's some other committee-sponsored process. That only would happen, I suppose, if there's some teeth in how it actually gets put together. Because, you know, at this point, we're just, you know, shoulder to shoulder, but we're not necessarily all thinking alike. And, you know, there's some decisions that have to be made, so not everybody's going to be necessarily happy with the result of those decisions, but, you know, it'll move us further down the line. That's just my thought.
Sure. What are your thoughts on that, folks out there in the audience?
Yeah, Bill.
So I know we were looking at acquiring for our next flight, but there's the question of 1 meter versus 0.7 meter. And I know talking around, I mean, going forward, I know the program specs for 3-depth won't be probably out for the summer. But if we made that decision, 0.7 meter would be kind of a baseline for the product that USGS is now looking at too.
Yeah, the 3-depth implementation plan isn't documented. I don't need one of those. And Bill's right. It isn't published yet, which is a dilemma right now. Some people have seen the preliminary version of that, the review that was it does call for QL2, body level 2, based on the National Enhanced Elevation Assessment you've heard me talk about over the years. It's basically 10 centimeter vertical accuracy, 2 points per meter density for data acquisition, and that will align with ASPRS LiDAR specifications that are also in review right now. That was kind of my comment. We're in between saying here are the documents. The links that I tried to put on that handout, I referenced ASPRS and the 3-depth, and when these publications come out, they're going to come through the state cartographer's office. I'm hoping they're going to start to show up this summer, July, August timeframe. Our fiscal year starts October 1. That's when the broad area announcement, the call for proposals for 3-depth and USGS funding is going to come due. Again, there's no guarantee that we're gonna have, we don't know what level of funding we're gonna have on October 1. We have plans, and that's as close as we can be at this point, so. But, yes, quality level 2 is a target goal for what 3 DEP will fund, and that's definitely a notch better, higher, however you wanna look at it, than what most counties have got right now, and what they've done in the recent past.
Kurt, did you have a question?
Well, I guess just a comment. In my opinion, there's plenty of standards out there. You just mentioned a couple. ASPRS, NCS, FEMA. Those 3 federal organizations have done a good job of sort of bringing them together so they're fairly consistent. So to me, the key isn't necessarily standards. I do agree with the comments that were made that the technology is advancing rapidly in terms of data distribution. So I think that's going to solve itself as well. And to me, I guess my only comment on the governance structure, what I see going on in this state, to me, mirrors exactly that national map model, which is higher resolution data sets at a local level, assembled together into a national model. Sort of quilt, higher accuracy data at the levels that it needs to be used, and that's just sort of filtered up to the upper levels to where it can be accessed by broader organizations. And so I have mixed feelings about a 25-year history in the state that got us here. I've said it before, I would compare the Wisconsin LiDAR data to anything, anywhere in the nation. Same thing with the imagery. There's nothing like anywhere that I've seen. And I get a ton of comments on it when people ask me about how did all this data get created? This is really unique. So to me, I'd like to see us sort of build on that model. Follow that national map model. And I think one way to do that for state and federal agencies that are looking to get broader areas addressed is seed money to help those people that need those higher resolution data sets get them done as long as they meet one of those standards that's required by those organizations, which have really come together and gotten quite consistent. The fidelity, the detail, the accuracy of the LiDAR data that's being done far exceeds anything that the organizations that are looking to get this at a state or national level are looking to. So, to me, I'd like to see us, my last comment was just, I'd like to see us find a way to build off of that 25-year history. It's working fabulously. We do a lot of work in Minnesota and Iowa for counties. A lot of county projects, LiDAR and imagery, because those programs are not currently meeting needs. So I'm a little hesitant to get on board and sort of jumping on that bus that takes us that direction. I'd like to see us see if we can maybe take advantage of the direction of our ground government.
Kurt, how do you see vendors coming in line and providing more or less the same product or a similar product? You know, like the comment that Jeremy made with regard to what was delivered to him, and him being unable to generate or I guess reasonably feel that what he can generate is worthwhile.
Well, I don't believe that was your point, unless I misunderstood. The problem is not the quality and accuracy of the data. So the data is your willingness to break it down, that you are now responsible for the accuracy of, which if it's used for something and it's not right, you have a quasi-legal obligation for having created that data that was applied. That, to me, I would leave that risk on the contractor as well, although those things are really starting to work through themselves too as well. But maybe I misunderstood you, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think Bill's just trying to clarify the deliverables portion where when we got our data in 2005, our deliverables are different than what they're getting now. So as people come on board, new ones, or just that they're across the state, that they're standard, as a group, we can agree on standard deliverables that should come from the vendor so that they can be disseminated with a level of accuracy that is on the vendor. Does that clarify that?
Yeah.
So we didn't get
So,
an
yeah.
EM as part of our deliverables, so we're not gonna put one out.
Understood. Yeah, and I think, this is a really rapidly evolving and emerging technology. And so to try and set standards, that's been the challenge tonight. You have some of the most brilliant minds in LiDAR and remote sensing on that USGS task force setting standards. A lot of them from the private sector. And it's very difficult to set that standard. And a year later, it's on date. It's technology.
I'd just like to make one really, really simple comment when it comes to deliverables that drives us absolutely crazy. And it has nothing to do with the content or the quality or brake lines or no brake lines. Just have the same naming convention for your tires. Thank you very much. Okay? We deal with all the counties. All of them can be slightly, range first, township second, I don't care what it is, just have it all be the same. Thank you. That's just with our scripting.
Any other comments? Greg?
There was some discussion about how do we get more buy-in to start funding this. I think one of the biggest challenges with LiDAR, we can bundle it in with aerial photography because it's raster, or derivatives are raster. But users can't interface with LiDAR data the same way they can with imagery. Call it the Google Map effect if you want. They see an aerial photo and everybody understands that because somebody at one time has been in a plane and looked down or at a high point and looked down. Terrain data is thousands, billions of points. That doesn't mean anything. I think that instead of constantly talking about LiDAR, I think we need to advocate for the derivative products. If we're going to do floodplain mapping, we want to have accurate floodplain mapping. We need good terrain data, which means we need good LiDAR position data. You want to do watershed, you want to do modeling. That's another example of modeling. And as soon as people start talking about modeling, that's techy, right? That's not something that just the general planner or somebody who's just making a simple map does. They can put up an aerial photo and drop wetlands map on top of the zoning administrator to do that real quick, so you can't build there. But to do a model, that takes a technician. So I think that's the challenge that we're facing, is that we're now really starting to get into really technical data and use of it. And maybe we should be advocating more for statewide derivative products, and the only way we can get there is by having statewide light.
I totally agree with that. I think that's essentially what I intended, to say, is that we would have a bundle of products delivered in some commonality, and that we wouldn't necessarily set the technical standards for delivering that bundle of products, but that the bundle essentially would serve the purpose of the lay user of the derivative products. And thank you for clarifying.
One thing I'll throw in here too, if you look at the link, and I think in the presentation that Jeremy staged at the user group page, there's a suite of products that 3DEP will include, everything from the classified and unclassified point files to the DEMs, to the hillshade, to the contours on it. So there is a whole suite of products that will get around that, at least provide an option. And I understand that people have different flavors and derivative products out of it. We're dealing with the same thing, trying to state something at a national level. So I think that's another one of those points on what are those suite of products, what are those characteristics for some consistency and conformity.
So we're running a little bit tight on time. Kent, were you going to make?
Well, just one last comment that kind of has been danced around a little bit in the last few comments is that, again, I made that analogy of the parallel to imagery, which I think is still really valid. But there are these derivative products, like we were talking about, the straight up TEM elevation, the hillshade, the slope aspect. Those are all straightforward. Those are just visual. They are like imagery. You just flip them on and off, no big whoopee. But there's that other part, like what Fred was starting to talk about, we're dancing out, is that there's that other aspect where you're interacting with that data to do other stuff. And we have to make that clear distinction layperson, just, ill shade, the eye candy stuff versus interacting with it, doing flow direction, flow accumulation, doing hydrological modeling, so I think that's something that we kind of just have to throw on the table and be clear about.
So I have a question is, so what are the next steps?
Do you think the next step should be?
Yeah.
Oh.
My question is,
Well, I guess this meeting is I guess we're getting the band back together. So, some sort of summary of the comments that we received here and posting those comments back up on Jeremy's user group website and on the WiGICC website. And perhaps out of that, we can reorganize our thinking and approach some of these things in a priority way. We had originally set, and Howard had gone through the 6 objectives, and I don't think those 6 objectives necessarily, those still be followed, still be approached by the WiGICC. But Howard, we have
Yeah, I think probably those objectives are still valid. I mean, it has been a few years. Maybe we ought to reach out to this group again and ask people in an online survey or something like that, what would be beneficial to you? What could the group do that would help you advance your agenda related to LiDAR?
I think a good next step is a lot of training. There's a county that's going to be receiving LiDAR data a year from now. There's a lot of stuff that I can learn from Jeremy that, the stumbling blocks that, maybe he went through that hopefully I can avoid, or, stuff that I don't know even to ask. So I think that'd be a great idea to get some training and workshops or something along those lines going.
Okay, so I'm hearing perhaps a survey and also then incorporate maybe some opportunities for training as a step forward.
Can you make a LiDAR standard or address what you prefer? Period. Just a little manual and standard on what the field names have. Just do it. Just set it.
I don't care what it is.
What? You
I don't care what it is. The
You want-
naming convention, I don't care what it
We
is.
don't care what it is. We want to have a baseline, right?
It would be perhaps best if you don't care what it is for you to put it out there. Perhaps
Well,
others would care.
to me, that should be really the county. And like I said, it's just something so simple. It's like town range section, whatever naming convention, if it's based on town range section for the tiles, Kurt, right? It's just have it be the same. We have had situations where, and there wasn't even, I don't think, that big a time period between these data sets, but don't call that, where it was like reversed. Range was first. It was like, what the hell? That's all. Like I said, I don't think I
So
should.
it's common sense, but
Yeah.
still don't. I'll write it. Then it's going to be in our assessment manual. Here's the LiDAR standard. You're going to live with it. So.
I agree that I think this is coming from counties, and my job, I get to do a lot of contracts. The reason when you see, the tile naming scheme that change because a county or a municipality is storing the data in a certain way, and a lot of times you watch a schema change because the contracting agency, whatever it is trying to fit their data into their schema, and it would change with normal
read that report that we posted out there, and there are 600 business uses for high-resolution elevation data. So if you need a justification to take other people you work with, there's something on that list that they'll benefit from.
We really need that to be able to say we're spending this much more money on an elevation data set.
That was the justification for a national program, was to meet high-resolution elevation data requirements and the cost benefit associated.
Bill was,
I guess, kind of going back, is the one great thing I think for our group, because there's a lot of counties right now that are acquiring the data, we just had like a best practice for us right now, simple stuff, right, not the technical standard, but, you know, what type of LiDAR should I acquire if I had a choice, and what products, you know, maybe just a quick, you know, best practice or, you know, recommendations from the group would be a good start, because we have to make those decisions in the next 2 months, and it'd be helpful just to kind of have a working document that's going along with those decisions, so that we're in line with what you guys want to do in the next few years.
Yeah, I think to cut off a great discussion here. But it's Friday, and I know we all want to get home and do that thing.
I have one last thing, Justin.
Always.
As long as I've got everybody here, anybody who has culvert data, please send it to me. Thank you.
And I'm sure that, I probably speak for Bill here, and if you are interested in working on the working group and learning, please, contact.
I think out of this, there'll be at least initially a survey, giving an opportunity to join in.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, guys.